tonight. We are very honored as the Public Library of Brookline to be hosting this book launch event for Maxim D. Shrayer and his daughter Tatiana Rebecca Shrayer. Maxim Shrayer is professor of Russian, English, and Jewish Studies at Boston College, where he co-founded the Jewish Studies program in 2005. He is the award-winning author of more than 15 books of nonfiction, biography, criticism, fiction, translations, and poetry. His new book of Politics and Pandemics explores through poetry what weighs on everyone's mind these days, the impact of election year politics and COVID-19 on American society. Professor Shrayer is joined this evening by his daughter, Tatiana, whose debut poetry collection, Searching for Bow and Arrows, explores the weight of one's personal familial history, as well as the history of politics and identity. Tatiana is the winner of a Stone Soup book contest and a 7th grader at the Driscoll School in Brookline. So welcome to you both. Thank you so much for being here.
Good evening, good afternoon. For some of you, I know it's already early morning, and we're delighted to be here. Tatiana and I'd like to thank Brita for this very generous introduction, and I'd like to thank the Brookline Public Library for hosting our event, and of course, all of you for being here and supporting us. I just want to say that Brookline has been our home for many years. My wife, Karen, our daughters and I live here. My parents live here. Both the award-winning poet to my left is a student in the Brookline Public Schools and her older sister. So this is very much our home, and it's a great community because it's a community that really takes poetry and humanistic values to heart. What we would like to do is introduce our new books, and here they are, which appeared this fall. And Tatiana will speak and read first. I will then speak and read, and then we will gladly take the questions. Thanks again. And with that in mind, let me introduce Tatiana. And I just want to say how happy I am to be reading with Tatiana. When I was 8, my father, David Schreier Petrov, taught me classical versification. I wrote poems for a little bit, and then I didn't write until the age of 18. And the idea of being a writer or a poet at the time seemed mythological. Tatiana has been writing for a while, and she has stuck with it. And I think poetry is now one of her métiers. Tatiana.
Hello, so this is my book of poetry, and I'm just going to talk about it for a little and then read some poems. So I wrote some of these poems from the age of 7, so that's when I started writing, and then last summer when I heard about the contest at Stone Soup, I wrote a bunch of poems and then submitted it a day before the deadline, and I was very surprised with the results. So I'm going to read some poems from there. And it's called Searching for Bow and Arrows. The first poem I'll read is called Searching for Bow and Arrows. Because I wanted to feel like an Amazon, I asked my father to build me a bow with arrows. We went to a nearby woods that overlook Forest Beach in the village of South Chatham. My father, sister, and I followed a wavy uphill path to the clearing where we found young oak trees with pointy, strong branches. We sawed off 3 branches that looked like they would suffice. We carved them and sanded them and bent them till they could sing. By the time we had finished tying the string, the evening chill had descended. We shot our arrows into the darkening sky, where the stars scampered like red foxes. The next poem I'll read is called The Fishing Boat. On a cloudy Monday morning, bearded fathers with children trekked to the docks carrying plastic buckets and beat-up coolers to store the catch. As we boarded the rust-eaten boat, I, a 9-year-old city girl in glasses, saw young deserted men chopping squid and wondered if they even had a life on the shore. We set sail, and I heard the captain speak in his vehement voice, "Bait your hooks, hold your lines," and then I caught a glimpse of Hyannis, dissolving in the distance like a homeland I've never visited. The next poem I'll read is called Loneliness. Imagine the loneliness of a crab. It takes its anger out by pinching swimmers' feet. It hides under the rocks, scared and shocked, waiting to be caught. Do people remember that they hurt a lonely being after it's been captured, dried, and mounted on the wall like the head of a deer? The next poem I'll read is called The Jewish Graveyard. I made a journey from Boston to St. Petersburg to visit my forebears at a Jewish graveyard. On the way, we stopped at a little bake shop with tired women selling day-old bread. My father and I entered a rickety gate in front of the old synagogue. A stooped man with a wheelbarrow asked if we needed a water to wash the graves. Wash the graves once a year, I wondered, to connect with the ancestors I've never met, to speak to them, to hear their wisdom, to keep the memory awake. On the way back, we crossed a long gray bridge over railroad tracks and abandoned factories. I was thinking, would Russia be in my dreams if my father hadn't left forever? The next poem I'll read is called My Sicilian Trumpet Teacher. Each time he comes to our house to give me a trumpet lesson, he arrives in a large SUV and tells us his family hasn't visited in ages. He drinks an espresso, spreads pages of music on the stand, and instead of playing, he talks about Sicily. Mount Etna in the distance, his grandfather's old village, olives and rosemary, the only place he feels at home. I'll now read My Grandfather's Russian Typewriter. He wrote novels and poems on that old gray pony, but now it sits in our shoe closet next to a pair of old rain boots. One afternoon, I find it on the kitchen table, released from its case, buttons dusty yet ink still wet. I insert a blank page and type awkwardly in Russian. I'm gonna now read The Empty Cop. Once a cop, now he mows grass. He was once fearless and brave. Now he fishes off the bridge and sells oysters to local bars. Not his shiny patrol car, but his wife's old sedan. Not a sheriff's star, but sticky sand. He still dreams of his siren as the lawnmower rumbles. Rich people's gardens are his last assignment. I will now read The Cast Iron Staircase. In the market town of Yelets, in the south of Russia, stands an old high school for women that survived wars and destruction. Everything in the building has been restored, except the cast iron staircase, with curving steps and black polished railings. Everything has been lost. Only this cast iron staircase remembers the light steps of the young woman who ran down, clutching their new diplomas, dreaming about freedom. The last poem I'll read is called The Graduates. I was 10. I stayed on the Upper West Side, an old hotel with dusty paintings and gilded frames. My father kept telling me not to lose anything and not to be on my smartphone all the time. I was on the 3rd floor, not too far from the ground, a view of a bird's nest in dark alleyways, cluttered with trash cans and filled with loud music for the graduates. As the day unfolded, aging parents woke up and came down to take their coffee at the French bistro Nice Matin, where croissants were warm and omelets runny. As I watched these parents at breakfast, I thought they looked both anxious and glad, and I wondered if they too felt like graduates starting a new adventure. Soon these graduates will dissolve into a big new world, a hidden one, beneath the water's edge, that I have yet to see, have yet to love.
Thank you. Thank you. That was wonderful. And I'm hoping perhaps Tatiana will read some more later. I will now speak very briefly about the circumstances under which I wrote this book. I'm sure you're all thinking why our country is going through such a terrible patch of history. I'm sure that many of you are wondering if the world isn't on the brink of an epidemiological catastrophe. Those cursed Dostoevskian questions were very much on my mind between December 2019 and May 2020 as I composed a series of English language poems about the election year politics and the impact of COVID-19. A Jewish Russian immigrant, for more than 3 decades, I had lived with, or perhaps within, a language gap. What does this mean? It fundamentally means that while English had taken over as the language of prose, Russian had retained the special status of the language of poetry, and then it quickly changed. How or why? I think it happened because at the end of 2019, I experienced a surge of political hopelessness. I had this gripping sense of despondency and angst, and I think initially it found a spontaneous expression in English language satirical verse. However, and this is very much something my father and teacher, David Shrayer likes to say, life made its own arrangement. By the end of March of 2020, with COVID-19 holding us captive, I was writing about the pandemic. And as life retreated and turned inward under the yoke of the deadly virus, my poems became less satirical and more lyrical and confessional. In any case, by the summer of 2020, I found myself in possession of almost 40 new poems set in Boston and on Cape Cod, and really chronicling the way politics and pandemics have been eroding the fabric of our society. And this is really the reason why I named this book Of Politics and Pandemics, and the subtitle is Songs of a Russian Immigrant. Very much to my delight, a Boston-based publisher, directed by Michael Minayev, McGraphic Publishers, committed to releasing it very quickly in record time before the election. So before I introduce some of the poems, I guess I want to say that the poems were brought to life by extreme political and epidemiological circumstances. And I've come to feel that these poems were, or still are, my method of surviving the pandemic, and also, I guess, a way of proving to myself and to others, to my family, that poetry can still offer a modicum of faith and perhaps even a small dose of relief. So that's how it all came about. And I'd like to read a few poems, and then perhaps Tatiana will read a little more and we'll take questions. I'll read a longer piece and a few shorter pieces. The longer piece is the opening poem called A Russian Immigrant Meets His Double. And it really explains how I came to write in the voice of a Russian immigrant. We used to live on Beacon Street in Brookline. The year of the election was underway and all the different contenders looked like caricatures of virtue and dismay, and yet I chose the ones I could contend with as long as they succeeded, come what may, in beating the Trump and rescuing our tender democracy from a looming right-wing threat. I knew our freedom needed a defender. I didn't know how this theatrical election could be so dull. And when I felt fed up with all the rest, I usually took our silver miniature poodle for walks in a secluded old park. We'd stroll around the circle and I would doodle with words and rhymes, and later I would park them on my desktop, as though silly verses could offer solace and also hit the mark of truthfulness and justice universal, or simply paint a picture of spring eternal. The vernal season wasn't far ahead. The body shunned the chill and craved the sunny, languorous days, the honey of New England. On my long walks, I would observe a skinny, bespectacled fellow with a Newfoundland, old and piebald. When the weather wasn't rainy, they occupied a bench near the sandbox where the children built their castles. The owner read, the dog lay on the ground. For weeks, I walked my poodle round the circle without ever speaking to the man who seemed withdrawn or even antisocial, who owned a dog too weak to join the clan of other dogs careening or escaping from their owners who knew not where they ran. And yet I wondered, what if this is fated? What if he's also a Russian immigrant, my own double, conjured up, created to help me shape these lines into a rant against tyranny, indifference, injustice, against cruelty, contempt, intolerance? Thus I envisaged. When he came from Russia, he brought with him a puppy. Now 14, he's outlived his age and broken records. An immigrant dog the world has never seen, I thought. The owner lived in Moscow or Saratov, then immigrated at the age of 37 and settled in one of Boston's near suburbs, where streets and parks resound with Russian verbs. Meanwhile, the Ides of March augured disaster. The crown prince of death had crossed the Styx and from the underworld returned to spread death faster than doctors could invent a medical fix. The Trump was useless, Congress dragged its feet, and I forgot about politics. The living life retreated. The quarantine ruled over Boston. Zoom became our window into the world. Imagine my esteem for frozen spinach and for canned tomato. We homeschooled the kids. My wife saved lives. I taught remotely at night. I tried to veto the hours of Netflix. Then I realized that in pandemics, arguments like mine rang hollow, appeared oversized, especially to a keen teenage mind. I tinkered with some writing, nothing lofty. I watched old Soviet movies to unwind. I read my favorite poets, Zabolotsky, Akhmatova, Sylvinsky, Pasternak. I went outside when the New England sky bled colors of sunset. I headed for the park where the dog owners maintained their social distance, whereas the dogs refused to stay apart. My immigrant double kept his old place beside the sandbox, now cordoned off. He sat, a pad in hand. The Newfoundland was dozing at his feet. Sure enough, his memory was filled with greener pastures. The immigrant dog was tired of life. I wondered as my restless silver poodle was pulling at her leash and urging me to make my move, to seek out my double. A gust of wind went through a willow tree. I straightened my mask and slowly approached. Please note the haunting symmetry. 2 immigrants, 2 dogs. I finally broached the subject indirectly with a nod. Excuse me, and I don't mean to encroach upon your privacy. Don't you find it odd that we've been bumping into one another without ever sharing a word of conversation? I was wondering where in Russia you come from. My good double looked askance at me, then turned his gaze in the direction of sunset and replied, his Slavic accent not very strong, yet tangible. My old home has been renamed, or unrenamed to be exact. St. Petersburg, I guessed. St. Isaac's Dome. Yes, he confirmed, and countless other beauties. I love your dog, I interjected. He's so calm. He's dying, said my Russian immigrant double. I'm so sorry, no need. Now death's at everyone's door. I guess you're right. I heard you dabble in poesy. I chose to ignore his tone. I was interested in the substance of what he meant. Yes, more or less, now more in English than in Russian. Ha! Another instance of trying to outdo Nabokov at his game, my double asked. No, a survival instinct. My audience is here. I came back. Your audience? My double turned my statement into a question. I was losing track of our coded exchange. A stalemate? I said, preparing to leave the park. Wait, please disregard my sarcasm, the Russian immigrant said. My mood is dark. My mother is 85. My dog is dying. I'm lonely. I sit in this old park and think about the virus. Yes, times are trying. We all do what we can, I said. No, wait, my double asked, his own voice defying the rules of distancing. Can you create a living record? I'm not sure what you mean. Can you describe this? This? You mean the taste of spring on our lips? The April wind? No, the pandemic. My double spoke with passion. The way we immigrants endure every kind of destiny's tricks, but this is too sudden. He turned his gaze downward, where in the sand the local children used to play. This is too sodden with death. Forgive the unintended pun. I think I can. Been writing in a trance, don't stop, intoned my Russian immigrant. A mask slipped down and revealed his countenance, a feverish smile dancing on his lips. And so this way I met my Russian immigrant double, and he helped me with the voice, and I'm just going to read a few more poems, if you don't mind, and then we'll continue. This one is called The Senate Trial, and I think it will remind you of something we all lived through. I often think about the Trump, victory blaring from his trunk, the Constitution's butcher. His loyal senators behave like crazy generals who hate to ponder their future. He'll probably get away this time, imposing, elephantine. He stomps out his critics. In our history's own court, will he remain the tweeting sort, the brazen face of politics? And this next poem is called Go Clamming and Recite Russian Poetry. And it's actually for my daughters, Mira and Tatiana. We spent a number of months sheltering in place on the Cape, and a number of these poems were written there. At low tide, I bring my daughters where the ocean meets the pond. We call this area Three Waters. Beyond it lies Nantucket Sound. We join a troop of local pickers digging the yellow sandbar. In our party-colored slickers, we look like tourists, though we are Bostonians. The virus, dreadful, has sent us running to the Cape. In Chatham, we've taken refuge. This dacha is our last escape. How long will last? God only knows. The clams lie buried in the mud. The sun is bright. The panic grows. God grant that we don't go mad. And surely readers and lovers of Russian poetry heard here an echo from Pushkin's famous poem. The next poem is called Warding Off Despair, and it's for my parents. I can't get my parents to stay indoors and follow the quarantine. They say, don't isolate us. Ah, touché. I can't convince my daughter, who's 14, that patience is a virtue and the world will soon recover and become pristine. I can't convince my daughter, who is 12. She's, by the way, 13 now, so I should correct the poem, but here she is still 12. I can't convince my daughter, who is 12, that Levin's love for Kitty is not a lie, and Vronsky's love for Anna is not a poisoned well. I can't convince myself the plague is nigh, and we should hastily evacuate to the deep country where we could survive. I can't convince my wife it's not too late to load our things into a makeshift ark and sail off toward an unknown fate. So what's left? The pharmacy, the bank, the Russian store, takeout, Japanese, the park, the soccer field, the riverbank, the puffy clouds, the sun, the ocean breeze. I'm still alive, not down on my knees. This next poem is called A Prayer for Italy, and it was written back when things were particularly bad in the north of Italy. And I was thinking of Italy because it has a very special place in the lives of Jewish Soviet immigrants, and it's dedicated to my very good friend and colleague Stefano Garzonio, a bilingual poet in Italian and Russian, a translator of Russian literature, and a wonderful person who is based in Florence. A Prayer for Italy. And by the way, you will recognize in it a number of references to neorealist Italian cinema and several other famous films set in Italy. Death dares not rhyme with Italy, for Italy only rhymes with vita. Perhaps not always sweet, yet vibrantly alive, beloved, undefeated. To Russian Jews, this love came free. Here, we spent our Roman holiday. We rested, one foot in Ladispoli, the other in America's doorway. Oh, Italy, who will steal your bicycles and rent Umberto V's old lodgings? Milan, devoid of your miracles, the world feels so lonely. What use of verses of remembrance when the Italian earth is trembling, when Bergamo, like a frenzied ambulance, is racing to its day of reckoning? The Tiber meets the sea at Ostia. The Arno sleeps at Ponte Vecchio. These broken rhymes, a feeble offering. My friends in Italy, I pray for you. And perhaps just a couple of more poems. One is a light Boston-based poem, which has to do with, I think, what all of you remember, the experience of local businesses appealing for help when everything was closed and they had trouble surviving. And I think we all tried to help, but there's only so much you can do, obviously. It's called Philanthropic and a Bit Misanthropic. And the epigraph is from the great mid-19th century poet Nikolai Nekrasov. The Russian is «Все больны, торжествует аптека». And the English, in my rendition, all are sick and the pharmacy is triumphant. A local symphony orchestra is calling to ask for my support. I order a CD of Mozart's Requiem, Andris Nelson's conducting. A local Russian bookstore is calling to solicit my support. I donate money to help with rent, my eyes rolling. A local dry cleaner is calling to enlist my support. I buy a mask from them, handmade, to wear while strolling. A local Thai place is calling to encourage my support. I order a takeout, som tam and tom yung gung. A local gym is calling to beg for my support. I work out to my heart's content while staring at their Zoom link. And only the pharmacy is calling to tell me all my meds are in. I scream into the phone receiver, you pharmacist, don't triumph. And I refuse to rhyme and meter with the Trump. And perhaps just two more, also a lighter poem, which has to do with psychoanalysis. It's called Psychoanalysis During a Pandemic. And there is in it a bit of an echo of Tatiana's dream in Eugene Onegin. A fox came, and by the way, this is inspired by sort of the increased visits of foxes to our house and yard in Chatham. I found that foxes, for some reason, increased their presence during the pandemic. That's what made me think about this. Psychoanalysis during a pandemic. A fox came by this afternoon impersonating Jacques Lacan, or was it Jung? I wasn't sure. The fox looked Swiss and very mature. He summoned me to lie prostrate in my backyard and liberate my bound speech to let it flow, revealing everything I know. On my back, I lay like a corpse. The fox invaded my soul by force. It scoped me with its long red nose while its tail formed a noose around my neck. The fox insisted, submit yourself, don't stay clenched, fisted. He tortured me and took me captive to where unconscious was collective. Stop, Dr. Fox, I'm not your patient. I won't be part of your equation. I need my soul in times of crisis when isolation drives one crazy. The fox slipped out of its frock coat, becoming an embodiment of my COVID angst, my sleepless dreams in which the iams lose their schemes. And the last poem I'll read is a sonnet which is called Cholera in Crimea, and I think it's inspired by several things, most directly by the experience of my family in the late summer and early fall of 1970. First, I was vacationing with my parents in Crimea outside Sebastopol. And then, as you know, there was an outbreak of a cholera epidemic in the south of Russia and parts of Ukraine. There was panic. We managed to return to Moscow, and soon thereafter, my father was dispatched to Yalta with a small group of microbiologists to fight the cholera outbreak there. And so this is mainly a reflection on that, but also in a small way, an echo of the famous episode in Shalom Aleicham's Tevye, the Dairyman, where Tevye says to the narrator, so on Shalom Aleichem, let's talk about something lighter. Let's talk about what's the news of cholera in Odessa. So this classic bittersweet Jewish humor. So mine is not as sweet or as classic, but there you have it anyways. Cholera in Crimea. I don't remember the epidemic, just the panic. August 1970, Sebastopol, the smell of rotting apricots, my mother's dainty tunic, Ukchuyevka Beach, the cotton heat, the groundswell of fear, seething lines at the ticket office, vacationers like wartime evacuees, the talk of spreading illness, words like orifice or dehydration hanging in the breeze, the hasty packing, my collection of stag beetles forgotten on the window sill, our train arriving at Kursk station, empty bottles, my parents kissing on the platform, reunion. I didn't know another parting was near. My father, a doctor, would be dispatched to Crimea. And I'd like to thank you so much for listening. We, I believe, have some time for questions, but perhaps before I could ask if Tatiana would read maybe 2 more poems. I would love to hear them.
Okay, I'm gonna read a poem called Memories Caught in Seaweed. Wet feet on the sand, touching the seaweed. Memories dissolve in the tide. People toss wet seaweed as if it's a joke, to lose one's memories. Yet when the seaweed dries in the sand, it forms a grid and returns to life, our memory restored. This other one I wrote when I was in St. Petersburg a year ago. And I was in Dostoevsky's house, his old house there, and it's called The Ghost of Fyodor Dostoevsky. Walking upstairs where Dostoevsky walked before, looking through doors where he looked before, sitting in chairs where he sat before, mourning his young son, Alexei. Ringing doorbells Dostoevsky rang before, looking at pages he wrote before, shadows of him filling the air, as a white night falls on the Baltic shore.
Thank you. That's beautiful. I love this poem. We were actually there together, and it feels like it was in another life, right? Because everything that happened before COVID seems like another life. Thank you so much, and we are very happy to take questions, comments, and thanks so much for being here. And Brita, I'd like to thank you so much for moderating.
Oh, sure. Well, thank you again for your reading. Those were wonderful readings. We really appreciate it. And we'd love to take some questions from the audience. If you all would like to ask a question, you may unmute yourself and do so. If you don't feel comfortable asking in that way, you can use the chat function as well to ask a question, but we'd be happy to hear from you.
I'd also like to thank Stone Soup because they did a tremendous job on the book, and I'd also like to thank my family, especially my grandfather and father, for giving me inspiration.
This question is for Tatiana. Tatiana, how old were you when you first wrote your first poem?
I think I was 6 or 7. I wrote my first poem in Chile.
And was it prompted by you just kind of writing because it came out of you, or did your parents say, go do something, and then you wrote?
We were actually sitting near the pool in Santiago, and I just wrote it down on a piece of paper. They never told me anything. Though I knew that he was a writer.
It's a true story. And in fact, well, if I may jump in,
Well, please
how can I say it? Certainly, it would be a lie to say that we didn't encourage Tatiana. Of course, we encouraged her,
right,
because we saw that she was doing something that was a true experience in language. At the same time, I don't think we ever pushed her. My father spent a lot of time reading poetry with Tatiana and discussing it with her. But really, she is the driving force behind it. Maybe you could tell how you were meeting the deadline for the Stone Soup contest, because I think it's a fascinating story.
Well, so I already had some poems that I'd written, but like I needed to write more, so I just told myself I'd write a bunch. First, I just wasn't really thinking of any ideas, and then I just started writing more and more, and then the due date was coming closer and closer. I think it was sometime in August at the end, and I submitted my collection the day before the deadline, and I was very happy because I thought maybe it wouldn't be accepted because I submitted it late, but I was happy.
Well, congratulations. They're very good. Both books are very good.
Thank you, Ginny.
I'm William from Stone Soup, and I just want to say how proud that I am and everyone is at Stone Soup to have the honor of publishing your poems, Tatiana. They're really wonderful. So thank you for having gotten it done before the deadline. And
thanks so much, William. I hope things are okay in California.
It's good where I live, yes.
Good.
Yes.
Good.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Of course.
Yes, I'm the other grandmother who speaks no Russian and lives at the other end of the world, it seems. I was wondering about your sister Tatiana, because she's had all similar influences and travel experiences. Did she have any interest in writing poetry, or do her interests lie elsewhere?
No, I guess she's more like, I remember last year in school we were learning about different parts of the brain and how some people are more analytical and some people are more creative, and I guess she's on the more analytical part of the world. Yeah.
Thank you.
She's also very talented in many, many ways.
She was also a great reader when she was younger. I don't know. Right now I know she's into athletics. But
she's into many things, math,
many things.
Skiing. But I think she really admires this sphere of Tatiana's being, and that's great.
Mm-hmm. Okay, what do you admire about your sister, Mira?
Well, I think she's a rock and she's the strongest person I know. And she's like the calmest person I know.
Yes, she's our
Wonderful.
rock. Yes,
Wonderful. Is she here this evening?
I'm sure she is. I'm sure she is. Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment. And it's actually for Tatiana. I was really moved by your poetry. I've read some of it before, and your insights really strike a note. But what I was taken by was your presentation. You're like a very soft light in a very dark afternoon, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, David. Yes. This is David Burndes, screenwriter and a very good friend and a collaborator, and I'm very happy to have him join us.
I actually have a question that both of you could answer, I think. I noticed that both Brookline and Chatham were mentioned in your work, and I wonder if, having now spent some part of the year in each place writing, if you find different inspiration here in the city that you do from what you do on the Cape, and what that's like.
Well, I think Brookline in this area is a little more, I guess, congested, and it's more like a city. So I think more of my poetry is focused in nature, maybe, and some of it's based on that. Yeah, I think more of it's in nature, Cape Cod, that area.
And also you wrote the bulk of this manuscript in Chatham, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And so as far as I'm concerned, it's a very interesting question because as I was mentioning before, the book began spontaneously as satirical, topical, political poems, and we were still living in Brookline, and then the situation changed. We moved to Chatham for a number of months, and I think my focus changed, and what would sometimes happen is I would take trips to Brookline, and I would drive, and I would get to Brookline, and I would write down the poem that had emerged. But one other bizarre thing was happening, which is that almost in a parallel fashion, I began to compose new Russian poems. And the only place I would write them is, I have a little office, a one-room cottage on the Cape, on our property. And I would go there, and I could only compose there. So it's certainly, as far as the space, as far as the Cape, was where, I guess, for both Tatiana and for me, the poetic center of gravity was.
Thank you. Other questions? Comments?
Yeah, I have a quick comment and then a question. It's actually kind of funny. I was talking to my students actually Tuesday, and we somehow got into the discussion of young artists. And one of the things that I kind of said was that it's kind of you hear it kind of not common, but it's more often that you hear about sort of like a young musical talent or something like that. But it's very rare to have sort of like an impressive young writerly voice. And so I stand corrected here. It's sort of a mea culpa. So thank you for sort of like correcting my perspective. The poems were really, really wonderful. And I guess my question is, you sort of talked about how you sort of started in this like a very sort of satirical mode and then moved into a lyric mode. Was that sort of a conscious choice, or did you sort of find that that was sort of like an inner response that you were sort of just following the lead?
Very much how sort of the current of whatever the moment took me. I really, in fact, the whole book, Brian, and all of your friends, I really am telling you exactly how it is, was a surprise. Because for 33 years, I had only written occasional poetry in English, had a few published, but really it did not come naturally to me. And then it started doing that. And really, when I felt that pandemic was more important than anything else, the focus changed, and with it the mode. But in a sense, Brian, don't you think that writing sort of topical satirical poetry when people were dying would have been a little odd and perverse? I'm sure that some have, but that is to say, there is a little bit of that as well.
If I can speak to something to what Brian said, and I've been publishing writing by children for almost 50 years. And there definitely was a liberation period once that computers became household objects. Because the computer really frees young people from the problem of handwriting. Frees me too, by the way, since I can't read my handwriting. So Tatiana, she's fabulous, but there's many fabulous child writers, and the whole purpose of Stone Soup has been for 50 years to introduce the world to the fact that young people can think and write at a profound level. So if you go to stonesoup.com, it's Stone Soup, you can remember it's the folktale. You'll find writing there, and of course, you know, buy her book, and that's it. Really.
By the way, William, the household joke has been that Stone Soup is the New Yorker for young writers. You know.
Right.
And Chad, can I tell them about the New Yorker? Or is that a secret? Basically, Tatiana has twice submitted poetry to the New Yorker, and she got personal notes from the poetry editor. I have never once gotten, no, I once heard from David Remnick personally, but basically she got 2 notes from the poetry editor saying that we considered the poems carefully, but please continue to submit. And I said, Tatiana, basically you are in the New Yorker for kids, and you're almost in the New Yorker.
Well, a million years ago, Ms. Magazine, when it was still publishing, they reviewed Stone Soup at the very, very beginning of time. And they said we were the New Yorker of the 8 to 13 set.
You see?
So you see. But no, really, young people do brilliant music, and musicians have been freed. Child composers have been freed with this program, Sibelius. This is the golden age of creative work by young people, and it's fabulous.
Thank you.
Yeah, and your poems are wonderful too.
Thank you. But
you're no longer 13, so you just.
Can I say something? I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt. Yeah.
Go ahead. Sure.
Do you hear me? Do you hear me?
Yes, Olga.
So first of all, thank you for a wonderful and a very, very moving evening. Both of you, Tanyusha, you are maturing as a poet. And I have to say that both of you somehow restored the horrible experience of coronavirus and kind of poetically helped me to revisit it once again. So it was really a beautiful and very since I'm also Brooklynian and Cape Codian. Maxim, unfortunately, for the first 10 minutes, I struggled with technology. So what interests me a lot is, so did you write all cycle of this poetry exclusively in English, or some of them were simultaneously written in Russian? And I'm very interested, what is your impetus? Because you are a native speaker, obviously also such emotional, devastating experience. So what is the first poetic line that you hear? Are they Russian or English?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, and I'll try to answer it very precisely. With these poems, they were all composed originally in English, and I heard them originally in English. Well, this is why, for me, this is such a strange new experience. However, in the course of composing what eventually became a book, I also then did some self-translations, mainly a couple on request of people who were doing anthologies of coronavirus poetry in Russian. And so there are a few Russian language versions, but the English ones came first in this case. And they sort of began, Olga, really with a certain sentiment that was on my mind, be it the Senate trial, or be it, I have one poem here called Six Hooligans, which is about the presidential debates, where basically I felt that I could only reflect on it through the prism of satire, however imperfect the expression. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Can I say, can you hear me?
Yes, Mamishka, we can hear you.
I am Tanyusha's Boston grandmother, and I am Maxim's mother. So first of all, I'm very, very happy for both of you to have this reading. It was absolutely wonderful. Maxim, you always read your poetry wonderfully, and you gave a special voice to it now. Of course, I read the book before, but it's not the same. When I hear you read it, it just gives so much strength and so much expression that I was very, very happy to hear it again. I mean, again, after reading it with my eyes. So, Tanyusha, I'm very, very happy. I think the whole family is very happy today because it's such a wonderful event. I think I can probably join Olga's question, or rather answer, when she was wondering if you sometimes think or even write your poems in Russian. I don't think you do, as far as I hear you. What?
Well, I wrote one poem in Russian once.
In Russian?
Yeah.
Well, then I missed it. I'm sorry.
No, actually, the typewriter poem she read, where she types on my father's typewriter, is actually a reflection on what she was doing.
Yeah. But I guess it's harder for me to write in Russian.
Of course. Of course, you're an American girl, yeah, and you think and write in English, of course. Talking about the typewriter, and not only, I was particularly very happy to hear a lot of Russian motives in your poetry, because for us, it's our roots, and of course, it's always very, very important to hear that you think about these things and you write about these things. But my special sweet surprise in the book was your poem, My Grandfather's Russian Typewriter. This typewriter traveled a long way from Russia. And not only did it travel physically, but you know, there is a story written by your grandfather, with the character of which, surprisingly, is this very typewriter. So the thing that you found it dusty and old in your country house in Chatham, and played with it, looked at it, was thinking about it, and then wrote this poem is really very, very great. And your grandfather is sitting next to me, and I know he's very happy and he's thinking the same thing that I just said. So we wish you many more successful and wonderful poems and many, well, at least several more poetry books. So be well and write on. Thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you, Mamishka.
Can I say a couple of words?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah. We both enjoyed, my husband Harvey and I, listening to you guys reciting your poems. I am Maxim's aunt, Mila's sister, and Tanyusha's aunt. And this event brought to my heart and to my memory the most exciting time of my younger years, when the poems were recited in the middle of the squares in Moscow, and crowds of people were around the poets listening to their poems. I felt that someday you, Tanyusha, will be reciting for the crowds and crowds of people in the squares.
Hello.
They will be listening to you with the heart just squeaking from interest and joy, because that's what I experienced today. And even after reading your book by myself, thank you very much for giving to us this book as a gift, I felt that I could listen to your poetries on and on and on for a very long time. And I want you to continue reciting and reading it for everybody who will be interested to hear you. Maxim, you're always superb and very interesting to hear. And we are very proud of both of you for allowing us to experience this special evening tonight.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we're really touched that you were able to join us. You know, it's hard to speak of the beneficence of the pandemic, but the one thing that has come out of it is that people can connect this way, right? It's very hard to imagine a reading like that in many zones and even different countries. Thank you. So some people have school tomorrow, and yes, others do not. And Tatiana, do you want to say something in closing?
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. And thanks again to the Brookline Public Library for hosting us. We hope to see you again soon.
Thank you so much. Would either of you like to take the opportunity quickly to let us know how we can find the books if we don't already have them?
Oh, this is the moment of happy modesty, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think both books are found where good books are found, including Amazon, and both in print and digital format. And I think the bookstores are beginning to order them as well, right? Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you. All right. Thanks again for everyone for coming.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.